Good evening. Good evening and welcome everyone to this, our second joint AFBI and UFU webinar. Tonight's webinar is entitled Resilient Grassland Management, and we have a good lineup of speakers for you. Just before we move on with that, I'm going to run over some the housekeeping notes for this evening. As you've just heard, the webinar will be recorded, and the link will be sent out after the event so that anyone that wishes can watch again. After the speakers and the videos, there'll be a question and answer session, and anybody wishing to ask a question should do so through the Q&A button, probably at the bottom of the screen on an iPad or along the top if you're using your phone. At the very end, there will be a survey, and I would ask you to please complete that so that our team can get the feedback and hopefully keep improving the experience. The expectation is, and I'll be the guy at the end again, but we expect the session to last no more than an hour. So after the presentation, I'll be back on again to chair the question and answer part. But for now, I'm going to hand over to Professor Elizabeth McGann to introduce the topic for tonight. Elizabeth.
Thank you very much, William. And hopefully you can see a full screen there. If you could let me know if you can.
Yep.
Great, thank you, Jason. So folks, thank you so much for letting us into your living rooms here this evening. And it falls to me to set the scene just for a couple of minutes here, first of all. So as William said, this is the first of a number of webinars that we are undertaking with the UFU and Agrisearch. I'm really pleased to do so. And the reason we're doing that is because life is changing. So there we've got good old Grandpa Joe, who back in the day did a great job of producing food in the 50s, 60s. And really back then, you could say that farming was largely an extensive practice. And in fact, there's probably a lot of biodiversity on the farm, and soil health wasn't too bad at all. But as life moved on, there was a few more regulations had to come in. And Grandpa Joe's son there, Joe Senior, as we all know, we follow our names through our families. Joe Senior through the 80s and 90s has really had to keep up even more intensive food production. But in doing so, he's had to be very conscious of the nitrates and phosphates that he's producing on the farm and minimising the loss of those nutrients to the waterways. So Joe Senior has had a good bit of legislation to deal with in the recent years. But going forward, it's going to be a bit more challenging again. And last week, if any of you were on, we had Young Joe, but Young Joe's at a Caffrey BDG group tonight. So his sister here, Young Josie, is accompanying us tonight. And the farming for the young people going forward, the next generation, is going to be such that they not only need to produce good food, good, healthy, safe food on our farms, but they're going to have to continue to reduce the nitrates and phosphates. And we've all heard about Loch Ness recently. And farming does have a role to play in trying to reduce the nitrates and phosphates into our waterways. But also we're going to have to reduce these greenhouse gases, the methane and the nitrous oxides of the world, as well as ammonia emissions. And in parallel to doing all of that, we'll have to increase the biodiversity on our farms back to those golden days and the soil health that we have. And what the graph to the right-hand side of this screen also gives us a snapshot of what the grass growth could be right out to 2040. So Debbie McConnell, when she was with us a couple of years ago, took the weather forecast from the Met Office right out to 2040. Now we can argue how accurate that might be, but taking those forecasts and applying them to our grass check model, we can see from this grass that there's going to likely be more grass towards the back end shoulder of the year into October, November, and there's going to be more volatility throughout the year, as you can see by those red bars. So there's a lot of challenges ahead, and these webinars are really to help farmers and practitioners get that win-win out of both their farming practice and protecting their local environment. So it's to give you guys hope, and that there are plenty of mad scientists working away in the labs at the minute on lots of interventions, technologies, ways of improving things. But in the meantime, there's also a lot of things that farmers today can actually do today. And a report that we recently compiled with partners across the UK and published by CL, which is available on the internet, really outlined quite a long list of interventions that farmers can adopt, as I say, today, to help improve their productivity and profitability, as well as reduce the environmental impact of their farm. So over the next 3-4 weeks, last week we had a session on increasing production efficiency, and if you didn't see that, that should be available on YouTube to watch back. Tonight, I'm pleased that David Patterson from AFBI Hillsborough will be talking us through resilient grassland management. And then in the coming weeks, we'll be looking at dairy nutrition, then nutrient management within our grassland systems. And lastly, but by no means least, trying to help folk understand this carbon benchmarking story and what's involved in it, and indeed look at case studies of where it's been used. So folks, with no further ado, I'm pleased to now hand over to David Patterson.
Maybe Jason, you could confirm, is that slide showing?
No, nothing yet.
Nothing?
Nope.
Seem to have lost functionality here. Sorry, folks.
Do you want me to share what one I have? Has it changed? Or?
Bear with me. Goodness. Try that now, Jason.
Yes, that's you.
Good evening, folks. Sorry for the satellite delay. Tonight, what I want to consider is how we should consider our largest farming asset. So I'm just adjusting a few screen settings here. I want to consider how what the future holds for our largest farming asset, which is grassland, as Elizabeth has said, and basically ask the question: how can grass-based farmers become more resilient to be able to ride out the various economic and weather shocks and be better adapted to longer-term climate change? So hence the title, Resilient Grassland, Surviving the Shocks. But if we strip it all back to basics, grassland needs to be a sustainable, reliable animal feed resource at its very most simple, just to maintain animal performance in as cost-effective a way as possible. But in the near future, it also needs to be adapted to deal with climate change and to help reduce the carbon footprint of livestock farming. And those targets will soon be agreed for 2030 and beyond. And let's face it, 2030 isn't that far away. But where are we right now? In Northern Ireland, over 95% of our farmed area is classified as grassland. Perennial ryegrass is the dominant species used when reseeding, and it has the potential to produce those high yields that you saw on the chart there. Currently 15 tonnes of dry matter utilization rates potentially of 90% and above are achievable, but it's basically still a grass-only sward, heavily dependent on expensive chemical nitrogen fertilizer. And also there are those environmental concerns regarding potential for leaching and certainly for, for gaseous emissions. And also our grass-only swards don't do that much for enhancing biodiversity. They're less able to cope with the weather extremes. Therefore, I think there is a need to consider other species being included in our swards and in our systems. So there's two parts to the presentation tonight. Number one is, first of all, to look at grassland productivity and the variability, which has been referred to already, highlight how good, sound, technical grassland management can help with this, and also a nod towards the research to see what value, what added value we can bring to that. And second and finally, to look at how to improve and build grassland resilience. It is working. So the main challenge for optimum grazing efficiency and performance is the variability, which already has been referred to, and it makes grassland more difficult to manage and also very difficult to model from a research point of view, as you can see on this grass check graph. Also our sister project, Silage Check, which is looking at silage yield variability across individual fields, has shown immense variation with up to 40% yield variation across a single field. So the graph on the slide just now just shows the last 5 years of grass check data, and it's the accumulated growth over each calendar month is what's presented there. So you can see the overall variation across the season. But what's more concerning for me is if you look at the variability from year to year within a particular month. So I've circled July there, and I'll quickly move to zoom into that. And you can see there, hopefully, that there is a range of 800 kilograms of grass dry matter grown in July 2018, and up to 2,000 was recorded in 2020. So that's huge variation in a core summer grazing month of July, right in the middle of the grazing season. And even this past July was a bit of a soggy, hard to utilize grass type of a month as well. So how does best practice grassland management attempt to cope with all of this variation? And the challenge is there straight away, but it's about getting the basics right, starting from the bottom up, as I would say, correcting and maintaining soil pH, soil fertility. You could also add in soil texture and structure, but regular reseeding to achieve good sward productivity. And even regardless of the grazing system adopted, whether it's intensive 3 weeks, 3-leaf type approach or something more extensive and mob grazing even, it's all about measuring and assessing the sward, setting targets for grazing covers, for average farm cover throughout the season, and ultimately being flexible. And I think you'll see and hear some very good examples from the grass check farmers later on as to how they do this. So the default choice for routine paddock measurements traditional or in recent years has been to use the rising plate meter, as you can see in the photograph there, which does, it's an effective method, an effective tool for doing that, but it does take effort and time and discipline, and time is a precious commodity for us all these days. But at AFBI, we did take a look at some of the other emerging technologies as potential alternatives to using the plate meter. So there was a trial set up funded by Agrisearch and Dara a few years ago, and basically we compared the plate meter against actual clipped grass yields and compared those with the CDAX trailed pasture meter, the little yellow trolley at the bottom of the photograph hooked on behind a quad, compared again with satellite data imported and then low-flying drone vegetative index data as well. But interestingly, in the results of that, this is a few years ago now, and the technology is still moving on rapidly. But at that time, 2 years ago, the standard plate meter was still the most accurate tool for measuring grass covers. Another bit of recent research published by my colleague Taro Takahashi, he did some work on looking at the use of the rising plate meter in the field, and the basically the challenge was that the traditional approach to do the zigzag across a field to get an accurate estimate of the grass cover per field. But the next research question was to ask, well, could we not just go corner to corner or gate to gate? Would that be accurate enough? And basically, after they'd done their work across a range of fields, and these were grass-only swards, I should add, they found that the difference in herbage mass on grass-only swards was insignificant in terms of estimating the cover. And also of interest, it took just over 50% less time required for sampling each paddock when the straight diagonal method was used. So there's just a couple of examples of where reported research can add to the efficiency of doing these operations of grassland measurement. And a bit of a nod into the future, we're also looking at new technology there with virtual fencing, where they're using a couple of different stimuli to control grazing areas within fields without the need for fencing off individual paddocks. So there's massive potential savings there on labour and fencing time and so on. And the research on that underway at AFBI at the present with Queen's. And that fits in nicely to our AFBI Precision Grassland platform, and we're constantly trying to add to this and develop the various sensor technologies. But the basic aim of all of this is to link soil, plant, animal, and weather patterns and weather data all together to improve overall system efficiency and improve production efficiency at the end of the day. So the second part of the presentation I want to consider and focus on how we can actually build resilience into our swards to be able to ride out those environmental and economic shocks that do come along on a regular basis. And specifically, I want to focus in on how increasing species diversity of grassland can make an impact on farms. Firstly, through the use of legumes. Second of all, by using other species along with perennial ryegrass. And we're talking there about different species of grass and herbs. And finally, fairly big step is how to maybe set about integrating our grassland farms with woodland. So basically, how can legumes help us in this move towards better efficiency and managing towards adaptation for climate change? It's good to remind ourselves that applications of chemical fertilizer represent the single biggest source of nitrous oxide, which is a hugely polluting greenhouse gas, and therefore any substitution that we can do with other forms of nitrogen, I think, have to be considered going forward. That's naturally occurring nitrogen fixation here with the legumes, and also our organic manures as part of that as well. And in a way, this will help, or should help, to minimize the financial shocks experienced from the recent volatility in fertilizer prices over this last 12 or 18 months. And legumes such as red and white clover for silage production and grazing respectively, I think can make an impact on farms right now. There's been numerous studies over the years in AFBI and elsewhere which have shown that animal output, as in the slide here, animal output is only slightly reduced when compared to grass-only swards plus relatively high levels of nitrogen fertilizer, as you can see on the top bullet point there. And second of all, from the nitrogen itself, the biologically fixed nitrogen is then transferred in the soil, made available for uptake by the grass. And that nitrogen is essentially free in every sense. And it's also considered carbon and energy neutral. And an early carbon footprint estimate as a consequence of switching to grass clover, reducing the fertilizer, nitrogen, and everything else that goes with that. An early LCA assessment by AFBI showed that in a beef cattle system with white clover substituting for 150 kilograms of nitrogen fertilizer resulted in an overall reduction in carbon footprint of 19%. And there's more recent publications from Chagas and from UCD showing similar levels of carbon reduction from the switch to grass clover. And recently, this is hot off the press, we just looked at some of the new clover check plot yield performance data only yesterday. The last clip was yesterday. So I'm a bit nervous about showing this because it is first year data, but the green line on the graph is the yield performance, the growth rate of the grass white clover plots with 67 kilograms of nitrogen this year. The reddy brown line is the grass growth rate from the grass check plots with 270 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare over this growing season just past. So you can see there's a fairly dramatic change in the two lines. You can ignore what happened in the first period there because we were just getting the plots established into a 4-week rotation. But essentially, whenever, whether the cursor is showing on your screen, but through that June period, whenever grass growth, certainly in the eastern side of the province, when the grass growth was tumbling due to the mini drought period that we had, grass clover, on the other hand, increased growth rate and stayed high pretty much for the rest of the summer, despite the topsy-turvy season that we've had. And we just have to watch that we're comparing apples with apples here, but essentially the grass plots with that heavy amount of nitrogen going on, they're cut on a 3-week rotation no matter what. Okay, the grass clover plots were cut on a 4-week rotation. So what you've got here in this graph, the difference is showing about an extra 2.5 tons of dry matter was produced on the grass clover plots relative to the grass onlys in that June to September period. Now it is first year data, so I'll heavily caveat that, but it's a slight surprise to me that the difference was as big, and it shows great promise, I think, and potential for the potential for clover and the benefits that we can harness from that. Step 2, moving on from grass clover, is increasing the species diversity that one little bit further, and that's adding in other species of grasses and herbs. Photograph on the left is a typical ryegrass white clover sward. Photograph on the right is ryegrass Timothy. So there's 2 species of grass, 2 clovers, red and white, and 2 herb species, plantain and chicory. Again, you'll hear more about those from the farmers later on. But essentially, if we just pick up on one feature that these kind of swards contribute, and considering drought tolerance, and the deep rooting is tied into this, there are grass species, for example, that we could use alongside perennial ryegrass with greater rooting capacity, such as tall fescue, cocksfoot, and even this new species on the top left of the photograph, Festuloleum, which is a hybrid of perennial ryegrass and fescue. Basically a deeper rooting version of perennial ryegrass. And also the plantain and the chicory, as you can see in the photograph there. Again, when all 3 species were drought stressed, this is from a Spanish trial as part of an EU project we're involved in, that those 3 species in particular, amongst others, were proven to be extremely drought tolerant due to the deeper rooting. So there's a range of other novel species and varieties coming down the pipeline. Germinal, for example, have a new hybrid clover, which has got both stolons and rhizomes, which should contribute greatly to increased resiliency by having those rhizomes protected underneath the soil surface and be able to ride out more topsy-turvy environmental conditions. So, and you can just see from the photographs here, just to drive the point home, these are turfs dug out of our own grazing trial here at AFBI Hillsborough. Grass white clover on the left-hand side, relatively shallow rooting. When you add into the mixed species sward, the plantain, you can see the depth of rooting there, and the chicory even deeper again, and a much fleshier root. And it's not just a matter of deeper rooting for the sake of it. Those deeper rooting species are also opening up the soil texture and structure and leaving a much less dense, open, more porous type of soil profile, which isn't just good for soil health. It actually helps whenever you're trying to dissipate heavy rainfall events. So what can these swards deliver in terms of environmental benefits and animal productivity? The graph on the left shows the reduction in nitrous oxide emissions. First of all, from going from a perennial ryegrass sward at 300 kilograms of nitrogen down to 150, there's a considerable drop in nitrous oxide emissions, and a further drop whenever we measured the 6-species sward, again at 150. Now that's I think it's the only piece of work that has been done directly measuring nitrous oxide emissions. There's been a lot of modeling and predicting done, but that's a direct assessment. And there's ongoing work. AFBI is teamed up in a multi for more project, where they'll be doing a lot more mixtures and monocultures in a trial investigating nitrous oxides a lot more thoroughly. And on the production side, on the right-hand side, you can see there, this was a grazing study in 2020 and 21, the lockdown years. Live weight gain of dairy origin first year cattle out the 2 bars on the left-hand side, 2020 and then 21. The orange bars are the multi-species swards, which were significantly higher in terms of daily live weight gain in 2 years in succession. So again, shows good promise and potential for these multi-species swards. And it's not all about productivity and environment, but also, you know, there's other assessments of interest, biodiversity and soil health. There was a project with Queen's University here, where we found that there was a higher, not just a higher population of earthworms beneath the multi-species swards, but a higher proportion of that population were the deep burrowing type of earthworms, which again helps to open up the soil structure. So it's almost as if the plant roots go down and the earthworms follow. And you can see there in the graph, the box plot on the right-hand side, the green box is the multi-species or the 6-species sward, and significantly higher earthworm populations than all of the other regular sward types. But it's not all positivity. Our EcoSward project and our recently finished EIP beef and sheep project, with the farmers involved there, we've identified collectively other research gaps. For example, need to improve upon herb species persistency, and I know there's new breeding of the herb species ongoing. How to mitigate and manage animal bloat better. How to deal with weed control issues because of basically the lack of herbicides that are safe to use in these swards. And there's other things, topical items for research as well. That's just some of them. So we've heard about grass clover swards and potentially multi-species. We're almost, multi-species swards are just like a grass clover sward with some other fringe benefits. Getting started, I think there's a method approach here. I would start at the farm planning level, and that's about matching sward type to particular field characteristics and what use that field is going to be put to, whether it's silage or grazing, or maybe it's a dual purpose field. And then think about the north facing, south facing, all of that. So there's a farm planning element, and then when you drop down and you've selected your fields that you're going to work on and maybe try and get one of these novel swards established, it's about doing the basics. It's soil testing, getting the lime and the pH sorted, and I would emphasize control the weeds first. If you're planning on doing something next year, it's this year when you control the weeds in the old sward before you start putting in some of these novel mixtures. And just some practical tips there in terms of timing. We've found that spring is better for both grass clover and for multi-species swards, generally speaking, despite topsy-turvy seasons. Seedbed preparation, there's a range of options there. I could take all night to discuss those, but if you're looking at tackling a whole farm switchover, it will be some combination of ploughing and overseeding in different fields and for different conditions and reasons. Seed mixtures, I think we're moving into a phase where we'll have tailored mixtures of grasses and other species for particular uses on the farm. And we've seen that over this last couple of years. Things have changed rapidly. 10 years ago, it was all wall-to-wall perennial ryegrass. And look at the change there's been. Sowing depth, all of these clovers and all of these herbs are tiny, tiny seeds, pinhead size. So they need to be sown or delivered on the surface of the prepared seed bed, not in it, just on it. and then roll the seeds in and ensure good seed soil contact. In terms of post-sowing management, equally, if not more important again, is to impose frequent light grazings, much sooner than you would think and more frequently than you would think, to ensure that we get good, thorough establishment. And post-emergence herbicides will play a part in that, weed control part of that phase as well. And ultimately, weaning off the nitrogen, using low or zero nitrogen, even at the seedbed stroke seedling stage and thereafter, because every kilogram of nitrogen that you apply, you're directly impeding and inhibiting nitrogen fixation. And that's the whole point of moving to these clover-based swards, is to get the nitrogen fixation moving. Third and final step, the big challenge of trying to see how on earth we can integrate grassland and woodland. And the three photographs, I think, show the full range there. Trees at the edge of the fields versus trees in the field, or perhaps there's parts of a farm on the right-hand side, parts of a field or parts of a farm maybe, which can be dedicated to sort of more dense woodland. The video that you'll hear of later on from Patrick Casement is probably somewhere between photograph 1 and 2, which you might call parkland. So again, this is about adding these larger species. It's not necessarily trees, shrubs can be involved in the future, but integrating woodland into grassland farming. So what's the environmental benefit? What's the gain here? AFBI results from all of the really good work done since the late 80s down at AFBI Loughgall, where they have the agroforestry research. Results show that there's significantly more carbon stored in that upper soil layer under the silvopasture compared with normal grassland. And in terms of, if I click the slide, in terms of carbon sequestration, silvopasture can sequester over twice as much carbon as normal grass-only grassland. So I think the research has proven the benefits, and we just have to think more about how we adopt these into systems. Another very interesting feature, I mean, there's so many features that agroforestry and silvopasture bring to the table, but resilience to weather extremes, thinking about tonight's theme and tonight's talk and resiliency and all of that, what they proved at Loughgall was that the silvopasture, the soil beneath the silvopasture had much, much greater soil permeability. So as the water permeates and percolates down through the soil profile, you can see on the chart here that the light pink bars in the back are the rate of infiltration right down through to about 75, 76 centimeters. So almost 3/4 of a meter down through the soil profile, the soil in the agroforestry was still draining faster than it was in the regular grassland soil. So, and I think this is important for not only riding out weather shocks, but you know, there's other gains to be had there in terms of extending the grazing season, and maybe coping with flash floods of rain. Because let's be honest, we're getting those all through the summer. You could have 5 days of heavy rain in July, you know, and 1 or 2 fields of this agroforestry type establishment could be your go-to field in terms of a farm landscape, could be your go-to field to take livestock to. It's almost like an outdoor shed, and still we're getting these other benefits of carbon and so on. And we talked about that farm planning earlier, so it fits into that theme. There's other benefits there, and I'm grossly oversimplifying because time's almost up. There was benefits under an agroforestry for earthworm populations, macro and micro fauna and flora, and for the pollinator species as well, which is all good. And in terms of future research challenges, you know, the work has established the system can deliver this range of ecosystem benefits and services, but the evidence base is still largely from one site, and mostly with one tree species. So that scope needed to widen and has been widened with other colleagues in AFBI working on that. And there's still much more need for research with trees and grassland, with large ruminants, not just sheep. So you'll be glad to hear, this is the final slide. So to sum up, I hope you can see, that's been a whirlwind tour, but I hope you can see how In terms of reacting to some of these environmental and economic shocks that we have to deal with in grassland farming, how measurement and managing grass swards can be of benefit in terms of dealing with that variability that we can see in the graphs, and building up resilience by increasing the species diversity in our grassland farms as well for short and long-term benefits. But in case you're sitting there wondering, where on earth does this all fit into the bigger picture for sustainable farming systems of the future? In this last slide, further to that CL net zero report that Elizabeth referred to, and other modelling studies that have been published, I think these give confidence as to how the various components can fit together in terms of a farming system. And you can see there on the slide the combination of increasing production efficiency measures. We've talked about those grassland components. Last week, you heard about the animal production efficiencies that could be adopted. And if that can be done and release some land in a whole farm picture, release some land for carbon sequestration, and that could be trees, as we've just outlined, perhaps other land uses as well. I think that the sweet spot would be to achieve both of those and still achieve an overall similar level of farm output, and that's the challenge. But modelling will take us so far. And the punchline at the end there is we still need to evaluate these modelled approaches in real farming systems before we can have the confidence then to roll out to a wider adoption across the country. So with that, I will finish. Thank you, Heather.
Thank you, David, very much for that. And just a reminder to everyone that the Q&A function is open and you can put your questions in that at any time. So, as we said last week, at each of these webinars, we bring you case studies from farms across the province who've been working with us as part of the Beacon Grass Check and the EIP projects. These farmers are an integral and vital part of Agrisearch's work, and we couldn't deliver programs such as Grass Check without their help and support, and I'd like to acknowledge them on that. This evening's video features James Henderson, a beef and sheep farmer who farms close to Kilkeel, Hugh Harbison, a dairy farmer from Akadui, Frank Turley, a beef farmer who farms with his father, Paul, near Downpatrick, Patrick Casement, who has a beef and sheep on his farm near Ballycastle, and Jonathan Blair, a beef farmer from Ballykelly. So we'll get on and start the video.
My name is James Henderson. I'm farming here outside Kilkeel in County Down in the southeast corner of the county along the coast. We're farming about 150 acres of land, and it's very much a grass-based system. We have both a lowland flock of sheep, 250 ewes, and we breed our ewe lambs as well, and then we have a dairy origin beef herd of between 80 and 90 calves are bought in every year. Initially, I was doing the grass measuring probably for Grass Check and on a weekly basis and keeping the records, but as time went by, I very quickly found the benefit of seeing the level of grass growth we had, looking at my wage, how much grass I had available, whether I had a surplus or a deficit, and be able to adjust accordingly. Now doing it for Grass Check is almost a secondary concern because it's a priority that I have on a weekly basis, just to be able to measure, to see what grass growth is on a daily basis over each week, and then to compare that with the level of demand that there is through looking at my wage. And if I have a surplus, I'm very quickly then able to take out some of those surplus paddocks for bales. If I have a deficit coming, I'm maybe able to slow down the rotation and bring in some of those surplus bales to feed, so that I've got forage in front of my stock throughout the season, whether it's grass or sometimes, in the case of good quality, bale silage. The vast majority of the purchased feed or concentrates that we would be using is done in the first winter when the calves are bought in. The calves come in October and November, and that first winter probably 60% and maybe more of their entire purchased feed or concentrate is used at that time. Their first grazing season, the calves get no meal or concentrate at all. They may get a little bit over the second winter. If silage quality is really good, they won't need any, and then they go to grass again, and some of them will need some concentrate just to finish them off within that 2-year period. But that's because we've improved the grass quality, because we've been able to provide them with grass continually over that period and good quality silage, we have really reduced the concentrate usage. Traditionally, whenever we've bought a grass seed mix, we've always had that kilo of white clover in it, and we've never gone away from that. We've always saw the benefit there, and we're grazing paddocks maybe 2 years out of every 3. We're taking silage out on the 3rd year, and we're moving around in that rotation where we're allowing and encouraging the clover in the swards each year. And that has meant we have been able to ease back a little bit on the use of nitrogen fertiliser. And then, as you said there, we've introduced red clover a few years ago, and that has been made into big bale silage to be fed to young calves. And again, well, that's just grown on slurry and no nitrogen fertiliser, and that has been a really good benefit there. High protein forage with no nitrogen fertiliser. And again, we also have a small area of multi-species where there is a combination of red and white clover, plantain and chicory along with the grass, and that's more of an experimental sward just to see how we're going to develop that there. But it works quite well. It has its challenges, but it's probably the direction of travel that we're all going to have to go down. I suppose now since 2016 we have been operating paddock systems for our cattle initially, and then we've also introduced it to the sheep, and we found that a great benefit. Most of our fields are 6, 7, 8 acres in size, and to really graze those out properly is very, very difficult to do. So we split them into, for the cattle it's into 2-day paddocks, the sheep it's into 3-day paddocks, but it means that we concentrate on one area of the field and it's grazed down to covers of 1600 in the early springtime, and then we move them around to the next paddock, and that allows the previous one time to get up and the leaf to get going again. And it, apart from growing more grass, we're utilising the grass better, and the stock seem to thrive very well because we're able to present them with good leafy swards at each grazing.
Hi, my name's Hugh Harbison and I'm farming here in Nakadoo, which is between Nakadoo and Coleraine. We're milking 180 autumn calving cows, calving them all in 12 weeks, producing 8,000 litres off about 2 tonnes of meal, supplying Dale Farm with our milk. I think grass management is important for us because we're quite far north on reasonably heavy soil, and our grass growth will be reasonably slow in the spring, March and April, but from mid-April to mid-May it just totally takes off. And it takes a lot of managing, and the information we get from grass checking, just particularly walking our farm once a week and seeing what the fields are doing, allows you to take fields out and ensure good quality grass throughout the spring and summer months, and allows you to budget and see how much grass is available for the cows. We started applying slurry and very dilute slurry and dirty water to our grazing platform to try and reduce our use of artificial nitrogen. We found this year particularly it has allowed us to reduce our fertiliser usage by up to 15% on our grazing platform this year, so it's been a real good job, and I think our soils and our grass quality is very good too because of that, and I've been reasonably happy with it. So we've got about 15 hectares of multi-species in now on the grazing platform. As you can see behind us here, this is one of the paddocks and it's done really well. This field has grew about 9 tonnes of dry matter per hectare this year with no artificial nitrogen on it at all, and the cows seem to really do well on it. It's not all plain sailing. There's obviously weed pressure. We direct drilled this paddock you're looking at here. We direct drilled it last year into spring oat stubble, and I think that's been a real good job, and it allowed us to manage the weeds before drilling it, particularly the docks. There's also the problem with the openness of the sward and whether it'll have the longevity as other grass land swards on the farm, and it'll be interesting to see the results over the next few years. There's no denying the fact that the newer grass varieties are better performing, better quality. The cattle seem to do well on them, so we're just managing those and reseeding as much as we can, and keeping an eye on the soil nutrient status and making sure pH is right, P's and K's, and just getting the basics right really. Get those right, things usually fall into place okay.
Frank Turley from Downpatrick, farming partnership with my father and mother, farming 500 acres, and we're a suckler cow to beef system. So this was all about here, where everything's a grass-based system here on a rotational grazing paddock-based system. Maximising the amount of grass we can grow. Grass measuring is a big thing on the farm. I've been measuring grass here for 10 years or more, and then whenever the opportunity became part of the Grass Check programme in 2017, I jumped to that because it more is given discipline to make sure you're doing it on a weekly basis, because it's a very, very big part of the system and what we do here, making sure that the way the cattle are moved around and kept at the maximum performance. And then also being involved in a group of like-minded people as well is a big thing as well, and it's a system you can dip in and out of other people's knowledge and other things that are going on with other people at different parts of Northern Ireland and around the country, because there's massive variation even from ourselves here to our neighbours 5 miles over the road, from soil type, climate, whatever else there is. So it's a big thing from that. And also having the Grass Check, we have weekly grass samples is a big thing, so we can also monitor grass quality at all times of the year, in case we need to adjust our system as we're going through the grazing season, rather than just thinking it's all right when maybe we're not having the same energy or proteins in the grass at that time. So certain sward types that's on the farm, we have found certain herbs there in the dry weather when it's coming in, or certain herbs are getting us where we'd be buying maybe another 10 days to 14 days throughout the grazing season if it was a prolonged period of dry weather, which is a big thing, ensuring fodder is in front of the cattle. And also the clovers are doing a very good job at, when it does turn dry, they're covering the ground cover, trying to cover to stop direct sunlight, so stopping any evaporation out of the ground or moisture being pulled out of the ground from them. So we're buying a few extra days to a week longer in the grazing seasons, which mightn't seem like much, but it's a whole lot whenever it comes into the whole picture of the whole thing. So, it's a batch of growing cattle, about 14-month-old growing cattle in a multi-species, typical multi-species, off the peg, 6 species mix. You've got red, white clover, plantain, chicory, with the tall fescue, small bit of cocksfoot, and then your perennial ryegrasses in the mix. Cattle are grazing this pretty much the same style of system around the rest of the farm, albeit they come into it at a heavier cover and they go out of it at a heavier cover as well, but they're still on a 2-day paddock rotation system as they move through it. Cattle are content and happy on it all the time. One of the main real things to see from it is, for the bloat issue or the worry that we have on the farm, is making sure the cattle are never hungry, so they're not going in on an empty stomach into the next paddock, so they're gorging on these clovers. That's what we're finding is causing the bloat, which is becoming an issue on the farm. So trying to find that, it's taken us a while to figure that out, and there's been a few mishaps along the way, but now I think we'll have it sussed. So that's the field of lucerne here. That's since first year, so it's a bit of a trial plot. There isn't many people growing lucerne in Northern Ireland, so along with AFBI, the Research Institute, this is one of our newest research projects we've been coming along on. It's the second cut now. It's the first week of September, and this is the second cut that's been taken off it. More than happy with establishment coming forward. People are telling us how hard it is to establish and stuff, but we got this on a good establishment in the spring and a good first cut, very little weed problems, and again, second cut has been a very good crop stand the whole way through. More than happy with it. Reasons for growing it, again, high fodder costs, high inputs. If we have to buy in meal or whatever, protein's a very dear part of the feed ration. So if we can grow homegrown proteins on farm to make it readily available for the cattle, this is what we're doing. We're a big square bale system here, so as you can see, these are square bales here. It's been cut with a disc mower, scattered immediately, left it for 24 hours, rode up 24 hours after cutting, and then the following morning it's in the bale, and we reckon somewhere in the region between 30 to 40% dry matter in these bales at every time. So it's a good source of protein for the cattle that'll be feeding young growing cattle over the winter time, either on keel or if they're standing out in the field, as will be added supplement along with the winter grazing.
My farm is situated just outside Ballycastle in North Antrim. It's just over 200 acres of predominantly quite sandy ground, slightly unusual in Northern Ireland, and it's all grass. We have there's a suckler herd and a sheep enterprise breeding mule ewe lambs predominantly for the replacement use for lowland sheep farmers, and then a small pedigree flock of blue Leicesters. Farmland trees provide a whole lot of benefits. They provide shelter, and that's particularly important on my farm because we're very exposed to the North Atlantic, just less than a mile away. They provide carbon sequestration in a way that we know for sure that carbon is actually being sequestered in a way that soil doesn't do. They provide shade in the summer, and that could become increasingly important as the climate changes perhaps. And they improve the soil porosity and structure underneath them, and provide nutrients through the fall of leaves, the deciduous trees anyway, through the fall of leaves in the autumn. So they provide a range of benefits, apart from the fact that they just look beautiful. This is a tricky one because it's an expensive business creating full-blown silver pasture and planting, ranks of trees. But I've been experimenting with parkland trees and putting in just a much lower density of trees, a much lower cost involved, and one can get quite a lot of the benefits, I think. The trees will grow bigger and faster because they have more space, more light, and more nutrients and less competition from the other trees. So that's one of the solutions. Hopefully there will be more grants available in future for establishing silver pasture, but it is an expensive and quite difficult business, particularly when cattle are involved on the farm.
Johnny Blair, I farm in partnership with my father and my mother. We farm just shy of 300 acres here in the northwest. We face out towards Donegal. All of our land is north facing, so we get very little of the south facing sun. We are all sucklers. We have somewhere in the region of around 90 cows, and we are trying to take everything through to beef that we can, but we do sell live as and when we need to. We are trying to target a more of a low input system here now as opposed to a high production system. The grass check has been very beneficial from the point of view of, well, one, you're meeting and you're talking with farmers who are very interested in grass, people who are doing roughly similar things to you, and people who are doing completely different things to you in terms of grass, and that's always a good thing because you have to challenge yourself and challenge what you think you know. Grass budgeting, I suppose, I don't use the same much now because I'm not taking grass out for silage as in a three-leaf system would, but at the same time I still enjoy measuring grass because it shows me what my benchmarks is in growing grass and how I can still grow grass in a low input system and what sort of grass I can grow. We've quite a few multi-species swards down now, and quite a diverse multi-species swards with about 14 or 15 different species of plant in it. Seeing a lot of benefit from the point of view of being able to grow at any time of weather conditions, shall we say. It's not affected by drought, or it's not affected necessarily by excessive rainfall events. Opening up the ground and the soil is as much of an importance to me as it is what it can grow above the ground. I think quite often as farmers we forget just how important the soil is to our businesses, and having a diverse mix in a field setting in your soil is very beneficial for the microbes under the soil. It's very beneficial for keeping your sward or your soil open and aerated. Whenever you look at a multi-species sward, if you're not used to it and you're used to looking at very neat manicured pastures, you will look at it and think it's a mess, and you'll think that you've just sown a bunch of weeds. But that is probably as much of an issue. I think you have to also give them time. Compared to a perennial ryegrass sward, a perennial ryegrass sward enjoys being beaten, it enjoys being eaten and recovering, and eating and recovering, whereas some of these more novel swards will require a lot more time to fully manifest themselves within the profile of the sward, and I'm hoping that they will last longer if I leave them longer as well, as opposed to only being a short-term thing. Very pleased with the mob grazing. As you can see, the cattle behind us are very, very content to get moved into this small square this morning. They get moved daily, which on the face of it maybe seems like a lot of work, but once you get into a rhythm of doing it and with very simple infrastructure in place, it is actually quite simple and doesn't take us any more time than what it would have done previously. Again, the sward will be a lot messier than what you would be used to in a smaller, shorter grass system. But once you get your head around the benefits to the soil and to your stock, it becomes less of an issue in your own head. If you see a lot of them, they look a lot fuller. Even the calves tend to have a lot fuller of a belly of a gut, because quite often we forget that cows and bovines in general need to ruminate, and in order to ruminate they need a bit of fibre. And if you're eating a very low height and very leafy pasture, and you're not going to get that same benefit. These cattle have not been wormed so far this year. There's two reasons for that. I want to figure out who needs wormed, so then I can get rid of that cow family. And also, I don't think there's a huge need to worm at present. Generally speaking, they're not showing any signs. There's maybe a couple of calves that could do with having a look at, but again, how do you find out who can stick it and who can't without doing this?
Okay, now, so I'll just do a quick sum up and then hand over for the Q&A. I mean, grassland is the bedrock of our dairy, beef and sheep farming systems in Northern Ireland. It accounts for over 90% of our agricultural area. For the past 50 years plus, our grassland has been mainly reliant on composed of monocultured perennial ryegrass, which relies on manufactured fertilizer. The system is very simple to operate and has worked well for many years. However, there are increasing pressures to reduce the use of fertilizers, which are one of the principal sources of N2O and accounts for around 20% of farmers' greenhouse gas emissions. Add to this, the weather has most certainly not been playing ball in recent years, hence the need to improve the resilience of our grassland. David Patterson and the farmers outlined a number of steps that can be taken. Grassland measurement is still at the heart of this. You can't effectively manage what you don't measure. Clovers will have an increasingly important role to play. Grass clover swards, as has been shown, can achieve good yields, but they require a higher intensity of management than grass monocultures. They are much more fussy when it comes to pK and pH and require nurturing during early life. Transitioning farms to clover is a long-term endeavour and not a quick fix. Multi-species swards are more niche and certainly aren't for everyone, but they do have a role to play on drier farms and have been proven to reduce the need for anthelmintics. Of course, there's so much more that we don't know. We certainly don't have all the answers for resilient grassland. Our understanding of soil biology and how that relates to soil carbon and other ecosystem services is still in its infancy. Agrisearch Queens and AFBI have just this week deployed a set of state-of-the-art sensors which will monitor all multi-species swards and the perennial ryegrass equivalents over the next year. The introduction of trees to pasture literally brings a third dimension to our grassland management. As David Patterson rightly said, models can take us so far, but we still desperately need more research on platforms and on-farm studies into these farming systems. So without further ado, I will hand back to William to chair the Q&A.
Yeah, it's me back again. So hopefully lots of new ideas there and lots of things to question and discuss. I suppose I'll start off back at David Patterson's piece in one of his trials. They had mixed species swards that had got a small amount of nitrogen. And our first question of the night was from Tim Morrow asking, is any nitrogen needed with mixed swards? And I'll put that to David first and then bring in some of our farmers, because they seem to be some of them seem to be using mixed swards without any. So David, do you want to address?
Yep. I'll try and be brief. Yes, absolutely can be done without any nitrogen. Not the case for P and K, as has been referred to, but there are some situations where there could be a need for spring nitrogen input. For example, if we're switching from a very heavily stocked farming system and trying to introduce some of these novel swards, there could be a spring gap in forage supply. So there can be some circumstances where a jag of nitrogen in the springtime could be required. But as a general principle, and you heard me say it earlier, every unit of nitrogen that gets spread does inhibit nitrogen fixation. So ideally 0, but if the farm situation and the farm setup requires that extra bit of fodder in the spring, it can be tolerable to put in some nitrogen at that time, get the grass grown, get it harvested and utilised, and then let the clovers and the herbs take over.
Thank you, David. Any of the farmer guys want to comment on that? They have the practical experience of this. Sorry, I muted myself there to hide my clock. Hugh Harbison or James Henderson, do you want to comment on you mix swords without any nitrogen?
Yes, well, we have only a small area, William, but we have tried to proceed without any use of nitrogen, but then we were able to maybe rely more so on our grass swards in the early spring. Certainly during mid-season and later on in the year now, the multi-species has done very well for us. But I'm sure Hugh and Frank have a larger area than I would have.
Yeah. In previous discussions around mixed species swords, there's been a question about establishment, ways to establish them, and then their persistency. How are you finding that in your farm, Frank?
Yeah, establishment hasn't really been too much of an issue now. We've got away, despite the dry weather there, we've been, along with our multi-species, when we're putting we're spring reseed when we would work them, where we outwinter all our cattle, so when the cattle are on the keel all winter, and then the ground lies in the springtime, was going into the lay then. So it's a spring reseed, and we're finding even with the dry springs that we might be getting, we're putting our grass seed mix, we're putting a half a kilo of fodder kale or rape in with it as a cover crop, as sort of as a nurse crop to cover the ground, and it establishes very quickly, and it also gives a chance then for the younger plants underneath to establish. And then whenever the cattle go to graze it, they have a chance to there's enough of a bite there for them in the first round, and once the cattle have nipped that off, then they're having the plants are well established and they're ready to go when they grow. So by the time the second round comes, they're all there and completely established. So we've got away, relatively speaking, okay with the establishments of any sort of clover or multi-species mix we've had so far now, and that's over about the past 5 or 6 years we've been doing it. So,
and what's your opinion on pH for
yeah, no, it's just back to the same things they're saying, where pH is about 6.5. 6 is probably still with 6 we're putting online with they like the high pH now, so it's about 6.5 pH, and P's and K's as close to 3 as they can be.
Yep, thanks for that. There's a question in here, I suppose probably for David again, and it was, what was the growth for the low N plus clover sward compared with the higher fertilizer perennial ryegrass sward?
Short answer, William, wasn't measured. The plots were only establishing through the spring. We had to actually oversow grass. The clover took off so well last summer. We had to oversow more grass into the plots this spring, which meant scarifying them back and opening the sward up a wee bit. So we had to ignore the spring period. So watch the space for spring 24.
Thank you for that. We're over time already, but I want to cover most of this. But on the silvo pasture piece, there's a question in here from John Martin. What species of trees can be planted which actually deliver a diversification by producing saleable product, timber or fruit or whatever, as well as locking up carbon? that may well be back to you, David, I think.
I think John has answered his own question. It is about those other products that you could get out of a farming system with agroforestry. For instance, the fruit production. It's not just County Armagh that grows apple trees, and hazel. For example, hazelnuts. Hazel is naturally adapted to growing in Ireland. Another one that I must just add in there, only discovered this recently, the humble alder tree, which is perfectly acceptable going into the farm woodland scheme, naturally adapted to wetter soils and actually fixes nitrogen as well. So how could you not like that?
Yeah.
Indigenous species and fixes nitrogen.
Yep. Thanks for that, David. Going back to the farmers now, the question in here, have any of the contributors got any experience of grazing management needed to retain the mixed nature of mixed species swards over a time? Who have I not talked to? Jonathan Blair, do you want to come in first on that one?
Yeah, well, I would say that I've only really been grazing multi-species now for 2 years. But what I would say is we've planted quite a diverse set of species in this wards, including the likes of bird's foot trefoil, which continue, you're told, doesn't grow and it's very hard to establish, but it's coming out our ears because we're giving it that extra time to establish and grow. I mean, we might be given something like anywhere from 60 to 90 days between grazing, so everything gets a chance to express itself and lay down a good root mass so it comes back again. So I would say I think we have to change our mindset when it comes to multi-species sward, and if you're going to try and incorporate multi-species swards into, say, your standard 21-day rotation grass, I think you might be in for a bit of a fail, because I think, as a couple of other guys were saying there, it really does need a bit more time to fully establish and stay in the sward, and it might even mean pushing the boundaries of what we think is normal. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how ours lasts now if I'm giving it that sort of rest period.
Yep, thanks for that. Hugh Harbinson, I'm going to put this one towards you. In your experience, everybody has said you need to start weed free with these mixed species, but on year 3, like, are the weeds back in there, and how big an issue is that in your experience?
Yeah, so the first field that we've established now, so before we direct drilled it, we had about forefront a few times to try and knock the docks a bit, and unfortunately the docks this year now have come out of nowhere in that field, which is a bit of a shame. So we're going to have to give that a bit of thought next year. I would say the best success we've had with establishing it and keeping the clean from weeds is direct drilling it into spring oat stubble. So that's worked really well for us. It's probably something we're probably going to do going forward. It just gives you an opportunity to use probably different type of chemistry on those persistent weeds and to try and control them. And it gives you maybe a bit of canopy as well to allow the seedlings to come up through the first few days as well. So I think the least amount of soil you can disturb, and as David said, the seeds are very small, so they need to be close to the soil, and the least amount of soil you can disturb whenever you're trying to establish it, the less pressure the plants will have.
Thanks for that. Frank Torley, I'm going to bring you in. Lucerne, is that an East Down crop, or is that an option for more of us around the province?
At this stage, it's very hard to tell. At this stage, we're in our first year. Down where we are here, definitely, it's going to be a big one. I think going forward, we're going to put more of it in, for future-proofing fodder supplies and stuff in the dry weather. How it'll persist it might be dry down in East Down here at the minute, but we're also very wet at the minute as well. So we're cut there at the start of September, and by the start of October, and in about 2 weeks' time, we'll be ready to either cut it again, or else it'll have to lie into the following spring. We don't really know where we're going. There's not really much of a forecast to show us whether we'll be able to get onto it. And if we do get onto it, what damage will do. It's more the fear of if you damage the plant, will it persist into the following years and that. So on different ground types, again, it's just the learning curve at the minute. We're not too sure how it's going to go. We're just going to have to suck it and see and wait and see what this year throws at us. So.
Yeah, thanks for that. Final question. We're coming. You've got off late so far, Patrick. The parkland trees, they're lovely to look at, but do they actually deliver the benefits that a full silvopasture would deliver, in your experience? Have I lost Patrick?
Yeah, they do, but on a lower level, obviously, because you have much less density of tree. But on the other hand, they do grow faster and broader and bigger, and therefore they will sequester quite a lot of carbon. The other thing that I found is that you can, we've designed our own tree shelter for them, which is a fraction of the cost of establishing silvopasture. And I think one has to take that into account. And they provide a lot of benefits. So it's like a lot of these other things, there are a lot of unanswered questions here, and we need to just give it time to see how it develops and how well they do. But I think, getting the species right, as we've just discussed, is important, and finding, the right species for the right soil and for the right exposure, for example, because, some trees, well, I couldn't grow them here because of the salt and the wind. Other species, no problem at all. Unfortunately, ash, which is one of the best species for silvopasture and for the parkland type trees, are a no-no now with ash dieback. They have a lot of benefits. They cast a light shade, so you don't get the shading effect underneath them. They come into leaf relatively late and lose their leaves relatively early, and so you get better benefit from the grass underneath them. And they grow very quickly, and they just love our climate and soil. So it's a great shame we've lost that, and finding a substitute has not proved entirely straightforward. I think there are various candidates, and I would go along very strongly with David's recommendation of alder, particularly on wetter soils. It's absolutely the ideal tree and grows exceptionally fast if it's got the moisture to grow. It's not. It doesn't have huge other benefits from the timber and so on, but it is a really good contributor in all sorts of ways. And as a native tree, it has a lot of biodiversity associated with it.
Thank you for that, Patrick, and indeed thank you to you all for your contributions tonight. It's been hugely interesting, and there's an exciting time really for all this, for this new type of species. So, as I say, we're out of time for tonight. I'll give you a warm invitation to next week's webinar. Its topic is going to be dairy nutrition, and anybody that cares to is very welcome to join. There will be the video of tonight's event available after this. So, thank you once again for joining in, and good evening.